All right, Jess, it's exciting. Thank you for doing this today. I appreciate you.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I just want to start all the way at the beginning of your journey personally. You started playing in bands in the early 90s. So, beginning with Soul Roach, forming Foreign Objects. What inspired you to pursue music, and how did these early experiences shape your career?
So it was kind of always a thing. And yeah, I think my my friend out of his room, and me as like a 5-year old, I was like, what is this magic? So I was immediately into it. And yeah, I guess one time his brother Chris put on Song Remains the Same by Led Zeppelin, and I was just amazed the whole time. And you know, Bonham just had such a presence in that movie that I don't know. I guess I just being my uncles are drummers, and it just looked so cool. It appealed to me.
Well, it definitely shaped into something really incredible. So I guess that brings us to the initial formation and evolution of CKY, which is a band that I obviously grew up with. As a co-founder of CKY, you've seen the band evolve a lot. Could you share some insights into the band's style, its direction, how it began?
Yeah, I like you said, it started out kind of as like a math metal thing. um, Foreign Objects, I guess, kind of was the first like iteration of CKY. You know, up until like Carver Cities, some of the old Foreign Objects songs got reinvented with Chad's production. So I mean, that's how long we rode on some of that stuff. But yeah, in the '90s, the first Foreign Objects CD came out in 1995 when I was still in high school. I sold CDs out of my locker, and I think a lot of people were into the music but turned off by the growly vocal style, which is funny now because so many bands do that. But back then, it was a real turnoff to a lot of people. So eventually, we just kind of started writing more rock songs. I mean, I've never been a huge metal guy. You know, Darren, who was the first singer, was obviously a huge metal guy. But I guess and we were both like very into like Kiss, Blue Oyster Cult, stuff like that, Scorpions. Um, so naturally, I guess it just went into a more rock direction, just because of accessibility, and we wanted to do music as our job. And in the '90s, doing death metal seemed like crazy talk of ever reaching enough appeal that you could make a living off of it. So yeah, eventually that led to Volume 1, which we started recording in '97, and then it finally came out in '99. And luckily, we caught the interest of Volcom, who actually got it out in not even record stores, mostly skate shops and surf shops. So it was kind of funny, like, um, originally when the first video came out, we kind of tagged onto that through a company called Landspeed, and then Volcom eventually got involved and got it. It took a while, but I think the first record store to pick it up was Tower Records. And
Classic.
yeah, I know. And it was funny. I mean, I've said before, like, it seems like the music industry was the last people to find out about the band. We had to sell. I think we sold like about 50,000 CDs in skate shops and surf and snowboard shops before anyone from the music industry actually took us seriously.
Well, could you speak a little bit about to kind of the universe that you created even in those early days? Because you mentioned how CKY was picked up in the skateboarding community. And, if you grew up during that time period, especially during the years of Infiltrate, Destroy, Rebuild, I mean, you were incredibly familiar with CKY, not only the band, but CKY as it related to the DVD series. Could you speak to more about that shared universe between CKY and the skateboarding community and the DVDs?
Yeah, definitely. Like, luckily, my brother became a pro skateboarder in high school, and that was kind of our outlet to reaching a wider audience. Like, it began, you know, the end of a Toy Machine skate video called "Jump Off a Building" was when we kind of got. I think it was like 5 or 10 minutes to do whatever we wanted, and we just did this ridiculous skit, and then that led to Land Speed, which was a wheel company doing a video, and the owner of Land Speed was a guy called Rob Erickson, who actually designed the Volume One album cover. Um, he said, "Hey, look, just for the Land Speed video, you guys have kind of full reign to do whatever you want." And luckily it caught on, yeah. And like, not just skateboarders, like, we definitely didn't anticipate it becoming anything more than like a cult following thing, but it was kind of a shock when it gained so much momentum that Spike Jones came calling and pitched us to MTV along with the Big Brother guys. And then it became Jackass, and then reached a level that we couldn't even have guessed.
No, completely. I mean, it goes without saying. I mean, it was a complete cultural phenomenon. But more than that, I think it's so fascinating because you see how many people it impacted just across all these different mediums, not just music, but the videos. And I want to touch back very briefly just on the CKY videos. What was your level of involvement with the CKY videos? And also, how did that come up that CKY, the DVDs, were also named the same as the band? I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, and a lot of people were just confused by that as well, which was fun because it caused them to dig more into us. And the internet was still very brand new at the time. So, it wasn't a simple Google. So people, that kind of led people to get super involved in it. And, but yeah, I mean, it just made sense to us to call it both CKY because, we would just film all day and then record all night. So it just made sense to us, but not to anyone else really. Neither thing have anything to do with each other.
Fair enough. Well, it definitely was a masterclass in distribution. I think as a case study, people even today, I don't know if they already do in business school, they need to look to it as a case study. Absolute masterclass in just distribution for both the music and the film. So
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was pre YouTube and everything, so I've heard people say it was kind of like the first viral thing, which
yes.
kind of makes sense. It was just done through VHS tapes and DVDs.
No, completely. But there's this huge surge. I mean, I'm sure you're aware, and just Y2K nostalgia. And it's kind of like for that reason, I think people are very much inclined to purchase traditional media again,
Yeah,
videos, VHS.
yeah. I mean, it's just not the same. Um, it's amazing that you can, I can download the new Graveyard album or something with my phone at any place, but it's just not the same listening to it with a tiny little album cover on your phone. Um, I mean, I'm really showing my age here, but like, there's just something about going to a store, buying a record, and then listening to it the old-fashioned way. It's more of an experience.
Well, I agree. I mean, we're so many years removed from it, and it does make me sad because I'll also say I remember going into the record store and there being, CKY related stuff there, obviously. You'd be able to
Mm.
sample it. You remember listening to it on the
Sure.
headphones. You could also, I mean, but did you have a record store growing up that really influenced you personally that you would go to?
Yeah, there was one in Westchester called the Mad Platter, and I mean, before I could even drive, I would ride my bike there. I'd like, save up I'd skip lunch at school to save up enough to get like the new Iron Maiden tape, and then I'd ride my bike into town, and you know what I mean. And like that probably sounds like a nightmare to people today, but it was amazing for me. I still have the Iron Maiden tape, you know.
So that is interesting though, because you bring up Westchester, and I feel like when we're talking about the CKY universe and we're talking about the contributions that you've made to the city, you have been able to do something very interesting with Westchester in that you going all the way back decades, you've been filming there, you've been operating from there, but you've really put it on the map in many ways, or at least you've brought so much attention to that city. What is it like having such like a personal connection with the city versus someone who lives in LA where things are just so divided? You know what I mean? What's that been like?
I think if we did live in LA or somewhere, this town is just boring enough so that you are kind of forced into doing something just to stay entertained, you know?
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, and there was almost a motivation of like, we need to get good enough to be able to leave this town. And that's why I like Westchester so much, because I get to leave a lot.
of course. You have the
When I
best of
go
both
into,
worlds.
yeah, exactly. Like any town, there's like lots of small town drama, and I'm very happy to not be a part of any of that, you know? When you go into a bar and have a beer and, you know, there's all this drama going on and I'm completely clueless to it,
Yeah.
it's a blessing.
Well, that's true. And I think it's interesting though, because speaking a little bit more to kind of the show business side of things, you know, growing up in a family, yourself, your entire family effectively being connected to show business, how has that environment influenced your career path personally and the choices you've made?
It's definitely strange. You know, I didn't understand it at the time, but it was it was really hard to get used to people thinking that they know you, if
Hmm.
that makes any sense.
It
Like,
does.
you know, I'd be in like Sweden or Denmark or something, and people are talking like they know you, and it just didn't register. It creeped me out a bit, but I kind of understand that, because there's movies like, say, Super Troopers, for instance. You know, like I'm a fan of those guys, Beer Fest and all the other ones, and you know, you kind of feel like you know them. Like Farva is like Mark Hanna to a T. You know, it's like the characters remind you of people you know, and I
Yeah.
think that's why people, you know, would come up to me and talk to me like they know who I am, like know me personally. And I kind of understand a little bit about that more. But yeah, it was definitely strange, and I didn't know how to deal with it for the first few years of that, you know.
What would you say is your relationship to it now in terms of dealing with that level of exposure? Because I feel like you've been in it for so long and have experienced it for so long, that level of, like you said, that intimacy, that exposure. How do you deal with it now versus how you did back then?
I mean, I've been doing it so long that, and there's so much music out now, and it's just crazy that I just appreciate, you know, I have no expectations whatsoever. You know, I'm happy that we get to still do this 25 years later, and I definitely don't take it for granted. You know, I appreciate when someone actually goes out of their way to take off work and pay $25 to come see the band play. Like that's I I'm forever grateful for that, you know. The older I get and the more, you know, bands come to Philly all the time, and it's just so hard to just simply get there because there's so much going on. So I definitely appreciate when people write down the day we're playing, take off work or whatever it is, get babysitters or whatever they have to do, and I I definitely want them to have a good time.
Absolutely. Well, before we touch back on CKY, I've been digging into some of your collaborations and side projects, and you've been part of various bands like Viking Skull, the Company Band, and others. How do these collaborations compare to your work with CKY?
um, yeah, I mean that a lot of those were born out of CKY broke up. Like the Company Band was straight up like the first time we broke up in 2007, and I'm like, now what do I do? And I was just sipping on beers on my back patio, and I got some liquid courage and called basically a lot of my heroes that I always wanted to jam with. And fortunately, they all said, "Sure, let's get together and jam." That's how that worked out. And a lot of the times we're sitting there writing songs, and I'm still like in "I'm not worthy" mode. um, Yeah, I mean Neil from Clutch is one of my favorite singers still, and Brad from Fu Manchu is like one of the sickest bass players ever. I'm a lucky SOB that I get to jam with these guys.
Absolutely. Well, speak to that some more. Tell me about some of your greatest, not just influences growing up, but even currently. Like who are some of the guys that you say to yourself, like, these are my heroes. These are people who inspire me.
um, I just did a record with Scott Reeder from Caius, and that was always one of my favorites growing up. And again, I was just in disbelief that this guy's playing bass on an album that I'm on. And but there's a lot of new, really great bands coming out. Like, and it's the shame of it because like you have to really dig to find some of these bands. Like the band I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, Graveyard from Sweden. Um, they opened up for us on a tour like a while ago, and I would go watch their set every single night, and it was so inspiring. Because you get burnt out on the road, and it sometimes it becomes a grind, and to see dudes like that light up the stage every night was super inspiring to me. And some nights, our fans can be kind of dicks, and you know, they walk up Graveyard, this band from Sweden. They're dressed like it's 1972, and some of our fans are like, "Peace, brah," or whatever. And they intended to give this opening band a hard time, and by the end of Graveyard's set, everyone in the crowd was just like, "Oh my god, like that was amazing!" Like
Of
they would
course.
win over a whole audience every night, and I love to see that.
Well, okay, this is very fascinating to me because, CKY's got this very hardcore fan base. I mean, like you said, a very cult fan base. Speaking, let's rewind the clocks back a little bit. And I think your relationship with bands in Scandinavia in particular, of course, BAM's relationship. Could you speak to how you gravitate? Because you mentioned Graveyard, for example. How did you
Yeah,
first start
I mean,
discovering these
there's so
bands?
many amazing Scandinavian rock bands. Like rock is the like when you go to Copenhagen or
Yeah,
Stockholm, like the radio isn't playing Nicki Minaj, man. They're playing like rock music,
yeah,
and it speaks volumes. And you could just walk into a random pub in Gothenburg and see a fucking kick-ass rock band. So it's like it's in the water over there. So it's gotten to the point where if anyone's like, "Huh, have you heard this new band? Where are they from?" Sweden. It's like, oh, okay, I already know they're probably really good.
So, do you listen to some other genres of music? I'm curious, just because it's like I think you and I would probably connect over a lot of these bands, especially as it pertains to him, bands like this. But do you listen
Yeah,
to other genres?
for sure. And I've actually become that guy that my kids teach me about new music.
Yeah,
And and I trust their opinion. Like they recently got me into like Jedi mind tricks and uh a Ghost Inside and Pierce the Veil.
oh, that's
I probably
wild.
wouldn't know these bands unless my kids played them for me. And to see how into it they are, like that definitely is a selling point for me too. But yeah, we got to play a festival recently with Ghost Inside, and I'm like I said, I'm totally that guy. I'm like, my kids got me into you guys, you know?
That's
they're like,
wild.
okay, you know?
Well, to hear you say that, that bridges a gap for me personally because, you know, CKY was a band that kind of continued on my musical journey, even as I grew up in the MySpace era, like listening to bands like Pierce the Veil, who, you know, I grew up in that era of the 2000s. But I think that's really incredible. Would you see yourself let me rephrase this. A lot of bands, if you go on TikTok, things of this nature, they pull a lot of references from CKY. Maybe it's stylistic, maybe it's aesthetic. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely appreciate. I've seen a couple, like the Royal Blood guys. Someone sent me a interview where they mentioned that, you know, their first gig was our first gig in England, Brighton, back in 2003, I think it was.
Yeah.
And you know, you could definitely hear some of the Royal Blood songs have like a CKY-ish guitar tone, and you know, I love seeing that. Someone just sent me Polyphia covering '96 Quite Bitter Beings on their live
Yes.
album, and it's funny because they don't have a vocalist. I don't think. I think they're all instrumental, but the guy is like doing this like ridiculous vocal, and I don't know. I've since gotten into that band. You know, they're incredible players, like virtuoso guitar players. It's crazy. And yeah, man, that stokes me out to see these new bands, you know, doing any kind of shout out or nod to us.
Absolutely. So that does bring us back to CKY, of course, because now I would love to talk about where CKY is today, the ongoing evolution, you know, work on albums like The Phoenix, but what the future projects you're most excited about regarding CKY.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a new album. I think it's done. um, that's another thing that's crazy. Like, there's so much technology coming out, like every other month, that, you know, and Chad is just constantly experimenting with all these new plugins and tape simulators and stuff like that. I mean, I know for a fact that he mixed the album and it was pretty much done. And then he got this new 2-inch tape simulator or preamp or something. And he did a mix with that. And it was noticeably like way thicker. The mix was just, it was popping out of the speakers, you know? He's like, God damn it! Well, now I have to remix the whole album with this plug-in. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's definitely the new album is coming out next year, and it might even be just on hold due to you kind of have to release an album these days to at the proper time to get, you know, festivals and stuff like that to make touring worthwhile.
Of course. So, a couple of key points then. Could you share some insights into how the band's style and direction has changed? Because you mentioned that obviously you're experimenting with a lot of new sounds, but are we thinking it's something that's very much in the ethos of CKY, or are you exploring very new directions?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the new album. I mean, it's got kind of something for everybody. Is the best way I could describe it. I mean, there's definitely classic CKY elements, but there's a lot of new tricks up our sleeve. We're old dogs with new tricks sometimes, and yeah, I mean, some of the songs. I mean, it's like I don't want to give too much away, but you know,
Of
like
course.
there's definitely you know, some songs that kind of are much heavier than anything we've done, almost like a nod to like bands like The Obsessed and stuff like that. Um, then there's like songs that have very like. There's one song that kind of sounds like it could be on the Breakfast Club soundtrack, or like a Talking Heads record or something.
Okay.
It's all over the place. The new album is all over the place in a good way, in a fun way. And yeah, that's probably the best way I could describe it.
Of course. So, okay, I think that teases it out enough for people who are obviously who are listening are going to be super interested. Myself, obviously. So, speaking to touring, what are you thinking in terms of when we can see CKY on the road again, and where would you like to tour? What's exciting you?
I definitely like I said, you know, the best way I could describe, like, I enjoy a lot of parts of Europe because they care about it. Like going to rock shows is like, they care about going to rock shows like we care about sports in this country, you know?
Yeah,
So I kind of appreciate that. And it makes me kind of spoiled sometimes. You know, it's like, why would I be playing Cincinnati to 300 people when I could go to Glasgow or Stockholm and play to 2,500? You know.
no, it makes perfect
um,
sense. No, culturally so different.
yeah, definitely. But yeah, I'm definitely looking for, and I shouldn't, talk bad about America. There's definitely like cities that are awesome for us still here, and Canada. But I'm definitely looking forward to going back to Scandinavia. The UK has always been awesome for us. Ireland, um, and we haven't been to Australia in like coming up on over 10 years. And I always love going there too. The flight is awful, but once you get there, it's worth it.
Of course. So before we touch back on CKY briefly, now that we're talking about Scandinavia, I would be remiss if I didn't ask what your relationship with the band Him is like, because it was so iconic that I think your family helped really collaborate with them so strongly.
Yeah, luckily enough, we were able to do their farewell tour in the States and Canada, and I think there was a
Mm,
Mexico show too. Um, yeah, so it was cool to finally do a proper tour with them because we never really did. We played random shows with them in the past, but yeah, that was a really fun tour, and I caught Villa on his solo tour in Philly not too long ago, and that was cool to see. Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously Bam got really involved and into them, and that's how I heard about them. But yeah, it was weird that we never did like a proper like world tour with us and them. But at least, like I said, back in 2018 or whatever it was, we got to go out with them um, for like a month, I think it was, and it was cool to finally do that. They're all great guys.
well, that's amazing. No, and obviously huge fan of CKY, huge fan of him. Um, speaking to something I find so interesting, just about let's just call it the CKY universe. Um, I mentioned earlier it's very much a family business. So, for example, you've been able to bring your parents out on stage, which I think is really cool. And basically, everyone you've known in life, they've been somehow kind of involved in either the DVDs, the films, just creating this
Yeah.
huge network. What has that been like? And are you still in touch with some of the people that we may remember from the films and things like this, even back in the day?
Yeah, for sure. DiCamillo, I don't see as much as I'd like to. That's rare. Rake, I see all the time. Rab comes over a lot. I just went out to dinner with Rab recently. Um, yeah, it's cool because we all kind of stayed local, and I'll just run into Art Webb's, coffee or something, and
That's wild.
then we just reconnect. Like it's one of those things where it's like 2 years could go by or 2 months, and it's like it's like we just hung out 2 days ago, like no time has passed. But yeah, Rab has really gotten into filming, and he directed a couple. He filmed a thing I did called Thoughts and Prayers, and he filmed a couple music videos for my buddies. But yeah, it's funny to see him get behind the camera, and that's like his gig now. And to hear his stories about like working on Naked and Afraid and like random TV show sets, you know.
That's wild.
Yeah, but yeah, it's good to see him doing well with that. And Rake, of course, is still a scientist.
I don't think anybody watching the CKY DVDs, I remember, could have put those two, kind of the juxtaposition of Rake and his
Yeah,
character, and then him being a scientist, which was always
right.
crazy.
Yeah, it's funny because we always say we're all going to get together, but it's easier said than done. And then
Sure.
a couple of years ago, I guess we did a live stream concert, and I got the band back together, man. Like we all got together and filmed some random skits on top of CKY playing, and that was so much fun. And we all kind of had that moment of like, why don't we do this all the time, And yeah, it was just, again, like we're filming random skits, and it was like no time has passed. We all just have gray in our beards now. That's the difference.
Of course. Well, speaking to that, did you have a favorite moment from the CKY DVD era? I call it the DVD era, the films.
um Man, it's too hard to pick. I was a fan of just being in the car when Deco would hit the drive-through and fuck with drive-through people. Or yeah, I mean, just my favorite skit is the Chester County documentary, which is mostly just DiCamillo filming pictures of like old people and narrating over like the dumbest scenes ever. You feel like you're watching like a history documentary, but it's the most ridiculous narration that you could ever imagine.
So, because, okay, so I'm getting back into the CKY films as well. I'm putting my friends onto it who maybe didn't get to see them when they were younger. Are we going to be able to see a new CKY film? Because that's what I think a lot of people want, myself included.
I don't know. We never really crossed that bridge because, yeah, I mean, it was the company that put out those movies kind of like once business got involved and there's distributors that are skimming off the top and all that, and we finally caught it, and then they just went bankrupt. And it sucks because when money gets involved and companies get involved, and there's just business bullshit you have to deal with, it kind of sours it a little bit and makes it not as fun. I think that's a big problem of what happened with Deco just had no interest anymore, especially with MTV involved. And I've been there in like just teeth clenching moments of like someone with a clipboard and a headset, and they're just like, okay, be funny now. Like, they're at work. They're at work. They don't want to be there, and it makes it work for us when it kind of never was. Like we would just go into the fucking woods with a camera, and just be ridiculous. And it's kind of hard to do that when there's a team of people setting up lights and you know what I mean, like, and a whole staff involved. It takes the fun out of it, and eventually, I think people got burnt out. And I don't know, never say never, but yeah, it kind of soured because of that. And it was fun, like doing that fuck you 2020 live stream thing and getting everybody back together, because there was no people with clipboards saying be funny or whatever. It was just us having a good time. So hopefully there'll be more of that, but who knows? We're all
No, I
getting older.
understand.
We got kids now and jobs and everything.
I get it, but I'm going to be one of the proponents saying that that's what needs to happen culturally. Is there needs to be a self-distributed CKY follow-up. There has to be an anniversary.
Right.
But okay, so I'll speak on behalf of myself on that one.
Okay.
Definitely would like to talk about just your family life, your personal life as well. How with your parents? How is it it must be really spectacular when they get to see, you know, their kids do things that are so impactful. Like, what has that been like? Because they've been with you all the way, and
Yeah.
you've been able to be in such close contact with them, and they've seen the journey. A lot of parents don't get to see the journey of their kids when they do really impactful things. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and it gets really weird when my kids, you know, like when my kids were really little, it's kind of hard to explain to them, like, you know, why people are coming up to pop up at the airport and getting pictures
Mhm.
with them and stuff. You know?
Yeah, of
And
course.
but one of the funniest things was my kid, my son London, like most kids, I guess, got really into video games. And so yeah, the weirder thing is when my kids, I have to explain to them, like, they, especially when they were little, they didn't understand when we'd be at a supermarket or an airport and people would be coming up to, you know, grandmom and grandpop getting pictures. They just didn't understand what was happening. And it's hard to explain everything to them. But one of the more funny things was my son London got into video games a lot, like most kids these days, and kind of went back and revisited the Tony Hawk games.
Yeah.
And so it was, I think it was Tony Hawk 4 maybe, where you can unlock a level where you could skate as my dad in his underwear. And
Yeah.
London did that and just was so confused. And I had to try and explain to him. Like, there was a lot of explaining, and he still was just had no idea what was going on for good reason, you know.
That
Imagine
actually is a
being a
really
kid and
funny.
you're playing, you know, Mario, and then someone in your family is in his underwear fighting Bowser or whatever, you know.
It's wild. Well, your father's iconic. I think that's what boils down to, and that was really the foundation of my question. You know, your family has been so intimately involved in everything that you and your brother have done. It's so fascinating because Phil, in his own right, has become, as you said, iconic in the video game, etc.
And he's very recognizable. I think he gets recognized more than anyone that I know of, because it's like, how do you miss Phil at, you know, the supermarket?
Of course.
Mhm.
Well, I think that kind of brings us into the conclusion, but I'd like to ask you one question personally. Just can you explain kind of the dynamics in your family currently and how everything is, and just speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, you know, obviously Bam's troubles have been pretty public, but yeah, we're still trying to work through that. It's been a roller coaster, you know, and hopefully he'll. It seems like he's doing better. It seems like he's been sober for coming up on 100 days or something, I heard. And
Fantastic.
I hope, you know, things get better. But right now, he's kind of like doing his own thing and hopefully figuring things out. There's always enablers around him, and you know, it's hard to get better when there's constantly people, you know, offering to buy you drinks or whatever at wherever you are. I mean, you could drop Bam at a truck stop in Nebraska, and there'll be somebody like, "Can I get your shot?" or whatever. You know, kind of hard to get your shit together and sober up when that's the case. So
No, it's completely understandable. And like you said, it's ultimately exacerbated by just this level of recognizability. And, you know,
yeah,
of course, that's totally understood. Well,
yeah.
I would like, yeah,
I hopefully, you know, it seems like he's getting older and he's not stupid. He's starting to understand, I think, what the deal is. I haven't written him off completely yet. I don't think I ever would, but yeah, it's just so hard to deal with when he's got people, you know, uh, egging him on and telling him, you know, like it's really hard for him to take accountability on anything because there's always people like, no, man, you know, you're right, they're wrong. You know,
yeah, of
it's like
course.
it's a fucking uphill battle, man.
No, and it's something I wanted to touch on. I think it's so important because it's something so many families go through, and I think we
Mhm.
need to, you know, everyone likes to sensationalize these stories, which is something that I don't appreciate personally. because
Yeah.
this is something that everyone has to go through, and it's such a human quality,
It
my
really
family
is,
included.
man.
Yeah,
Like people that come up to me, I don't think I know one family that doesn't have at least one person dealing with addiction problems, you know?
of course.
So it's definitely relatable and yeah, I mean, it would be great for Bam to, you know, being such a character still to this day, like um it would be cool if he could help people going through the same thing, you know? That would be something that I would be all about because it's not easy. And, you know, coming from someone that's really been through it and there isn't a question about addiction that you could throw at them that they don't know the answer to
Hmm.
is extremely helpful. I mean, look at Novak, you know,
Hmm.
like that guy is like starting rehabs, speaking at rehab things. And, you know, he's written a couple books. It's funny. Like I'll be out on tour and like my drum tech will be in recovery and, you know, talk about how like Novak is his rock star and got him off heroin and stuff like that. You know, it's like,
Yep.
it's such a cool story to hear. And to be honest with you, if you would have told me that 10 years ago, I would have laughed in your face.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, Novak is awesome example of like, you know, anyone can get through it. Because there was a time that I didn't think Novak was going to make it, you know.
Of course.
He's OD'd 3 times and had to get Narcan 3 times in one day before.
Wow.
It's pretty easy to lose hope when that's the case, you know. And now look at him; he's fucking doing great. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a cool story. It's a happy ending to a story that could have been really shitty.
No, I totally agree. And thank you for sharing that. It's something, and
Mhm.
I've, of course, have seen him on podcasts recently, and it's been very fascinating to hear his story. Um, Jess, that does bring us to the last question, and I really appreciate this so much. Looking back at your career, what would you say have been the biggest challenges and successes, and how have these experiences, shaped your life?
I mean, it's been a roller coaster, but it's just a success. Just that people are still listening to records that, you know, I hope are timeless. I think they're timeless. It's rock music, you know. I think a lot of the albums that I play drums on hopefully will outlive me, you know. um, so I mean that's the reward in itself, you know. If some I never know what to say when someone comes up and says, you know, hey man, like this song or this album really got me through a dark time or whatever. And I don't know how to respond to that. And I hope I don't come off as like, oh yeah, thanks. But because I know exactly what they're talking about. There's albums that got me through crazy shit, crazy times in my life. So I know exactly what they're saying, but it's such a huge compliment that I just don't know how to respond to it. And I'm super grateful to hear things like that. And I just still to this day do not know what to say back.
Well,
But
maybe
know
that's
that
the
I
best
appreciate
response.
I
I really appreciate so much you taking the time today to do this interview with me and just sharing your insight. I'm really looking forward to what CKY is doing in the future. So thank you.
absolutely thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Of course, brother.